Hi, thanks for joining me again. Today we're going to review Sadhana, the second sutra in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Sadhana means practice, and you guessed it, this sutra is all about the practice of yoga. In Samadhipada, the first sutra of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali lets us know why practice is important. He talks to us about liberation and the mental fluctuations of the mind. In the second sutra, Patanjali lays out the framework for a practice that will lead the practitioner to liberation. Let's take a look and analyze it as we go. The practice of yoga must reduce both physical and mental impurities. It must develop our capacity for self-examination and help us to understand that, in the final analysis, we are not the masters of everything we do. Then such practices will be certain to remove obstacles and clear our perception. We oftentimes think that we're in control, don't we? Patanjali is proposing that we're actually not in control at all, and in fact, we are at the mercy of our karma and the samskaras or patterns that come with it. The obstacles and misapprehensions, confused values, excessive attachments, unreasonable dislikes, and insecurities. Misapprehension is the source of all of the other obstacles. They need not appear simultaneously, and their impact varies. Sometimes they are obscure and barely visible, and other times they are exposed and dominant. Misapprehension leads to errors in comprehension of the character, origin, and effects of the object perceived. False identity results when we regard mental activity as the very source of perception. Excessive attachment is based on the assumption that it will contribute to everlasting happiness. This never happens, though. When we are attached to something, we are only happy when we have that thing. As soon as that thing is gone, we suffer, because we misperceive ourselves to be separate from the thing that we're attached to. Unreasonable dislikes are usually the result of painful experience in the past connected with a particular object or stimulus. Now, we can see how this is problematic, right? Let's say that I have an interaction with a particular person. Maybe this person is excessively tall and the interaction I have with them is bad. How does that impact the way I perceive people who have excessive height? Does that mean that everyone who is tall is going to be perceived as bad or dangerous? It's possible, and we don't even realize it's happening. Insecurity is the inborn feeling of anxiety for what is to come. It affects both the ignorant and the wise. And what Patanjali is saying here is that our anxiety is born out of the fear of the future. Forward thinking is what perpetuates anxiety. When the obstacles do not seem to be present, it is important to be vigilant. Advance towards a state of reflection and reduce their impact and prevent them from taking over. Our actions and their consequences are influenced by these obstacles. The consequences may or may not be evident at the time of the action, but they certainly will bear fruit. As long as the obstacles prevail, they will affect action in every respect, in its execution, its duration, and consequence. The consequences of all action will be painful or beneficial depending on whether the obstacles were present in the concept or implementation of the action. Painful effects from any object or situation can be a result of one or more of the following: changes in the perceived object, the desire to repeat pleasurable experiences, and the strong effect of conditioning from the past. In addition, changes within the individual can be contributing factors. Painful effects that are likely to occur should be anticipated and avoided. The cause of actions that produce painful effects is the inability to distinguish what is perceived from what perceives. All that is perceived includes not only the external objects, but also the mind and the senses. They share three qualities: heaviness, activity, and clarity. They have two types of effects: to expose the perceiver to their influence, or to provide the means to find the distinction between them and itself. All that is perceived is related by the common sharing of the three qualities. That which is perceived is not subject to any variation, but is always perceived through the mind. All that can be perceived has but one purpose: to be perceived. The existence of all objects of perception and their appearance is independent of the needs of the individual perceiver. They exist without individual reference to cater for the different needs of different individuals. All that is perceived, whatever it is and whatever it affects may be on a particular individual, has but one ultimate purpose. That is to clarify the distinction between the external that is seen and the internal that sees. The absence of clarity in distinguishing between what perceives and what is perceived is due to the accumulation of misapprehension. As misapprehension is reduced, there is a corresponding increase in clarity. This is the path to freedom. What Patanjali is saying here is that our perception, which here he's calling misapprehension, is what is causing our suffering. As our perception is decreased and neutralized, we are set free. If I like something or I don't like it, I am going to be attached to it in some way. Aversion is the opposite side of attachment. It's one and the same coin. If I perceive something to be bad and my partner or dear friend perceives it to be good, we have conflict. But if I have no perception of it at all, I only see it for what it is, there's no suffering, there's no conflict, and there's no attachment. Essentially, the means must be directed towards developing clarity so that the distinction between the changing qualities of what is perceived and the unchanging qualities of what perceives become evident. We are awareness in which all is arising. The awareness in which all is arising never changes. The only thing that changes is the perception. The attainment of clarity is a gradual process. Be patient and stay in practice. The practice and inquiry into different components of yoga gradually reduces the obstacles, such as misperception. Then the lamp of perception brightens, and the distinction between what is perceived and what is perceiving becomes more and more evident. Now everything can be understood without error. There are 8 components of yoga, and they include the yamas, our attitudes towards our environment; niyamas, our attitudes towards ourselves; asana, the practice of physical exercise; pranayama, the practice of breathing exercises; pratyahara, the restraint of the senses; dharana, the ability to direct our minds, dhyana, the ability to develop interactions with what we seek to understand, samadhi, complete integration with our divine nature. Yamas are made up of considerations for all living things, especially those who are innocent, in difficulty, or worse off than we are. Truth, right communication through speech, writing, gesture, and actions. Non-covetousness, or the ability to resist the desire for that which does not belong to you. Moderation in all of our actions. Non-greediness, or the ability to accept what is appropriate for you. When the adoption of these attitudes in our environment is beyond compromise, regardless of our social, cultural, or intellectual situation, it approaches irreversibility. We become seated. The niyamas comprise cleanliness, or keeping our bodies and our surroundings clean and neat. Contentment, or the ability to be comfortable with what we have and what we do not have. The removal of impurities in our physical and mental system through the maintenance of such correct habits as sleep, exercise, nutrition, work, and relaxation. Study and the necessity to review and evaluate our progress. Reverence to a higher power, a higher intelligence, God, the all-knowing. When these attitudes are questioned, self-reflection on the possible consequence of alternative attitudes may develop. For example, a sudden desire to act harshly or encounter or approve of harsh actions can be contained by reflecting on the harmful consequences. Often such actions are the result of lower instincts such as anger, possessiveness, and unsound judgment. Whether these actions are minor or major, reflection in a suitable atmosphere can contain our desires to act in this way. The more considerate one is, the more one stimulates friendly feelings among all in one's presence. One who shows a high degree of right communication will not fail in his actions. One who is trustworthy becomes he who does not covet what belongs to others, naturally has everyone's confidence, and everything is shared with him, however precious it might be. At its best, moderation produces the highest individual vitality. One who is not greedy is secure. He has time to think deeply. He understands of himself. When cleanliness is developed, it reveals what needs to be constantly maintained and what is eternally clean. What decays is the external. What does not is deep within us. In addition, one becomes able to reflect on the very deep nature of our individual selves, including the source of perception, without being distracted by the senses and with freedom from misperception and accumulated past. The result of contentment is total happiness. The removal of impurities allows the body to function more efficiently. Reverence to God promotes the ability to completely understand any object of choice. Asana must be the dual qualities of alertness and relaxation. These qualities can be achieved by recognizing and absorbing the reactions of the body and the breath to the various postures that comprise asana practice. Once known, these reactions can be controlled step by step. When these principles are correctly followed, asana practice will help a person endure and even minimize the external influences on the body, such as age, climate, diet, and work. Pranayama is the conscious, deliberate regulation of the breath, replacing unconscious patterns of breathing. It is possible only after a reasonable mastery of asana practice. Pranayama and breath regulation is the only way to impact the autonomic function of the nervous system, our heart rate, our blood pressure. These autonomic functions can be positively impacted by pranayama. Patanjali does say that we need to be established in our asana practice before we attempt pranayama. The practice is usually done comfortably in an erect position. It involves the regulation of the exhalation and the inhalation and the suspension of breath. The regulation of these three processes is achieved by modulating the length and maintaining its modulation. Then the breath transcends the level of consciousness. The regular practices of pranayama reduces the obstacles that inhibit clear perception, and the mind is now prepared for the process of direction towards a chosen goal. The restraint of the senses occur when the mind is able to remain in a chosen direction, and the senses disregard the different objects around them and faithfully follow the direction of the mind. This concludes Sadhana Pada. In the second sutra, Patanjali takes us through the eight-limbed path. You'll notice that Patanjali does not talk about concentration, meditation, or samadhi. These three experiences are caught. They can't be taught. They must be experienced. You'll learn more about these in the next sutra, Vibhuti Pada.